Hello, everyone. Welcome to my pleasure dome. This is Balkwell, and by this, I mean me. I'm Balkwell. Today, I would like to discuss Paradise Lost, and to a lesser extent, perhaps Paradise Regained by John Milton. And specifically, I would like to address a reading of the book, or a sort of perspective on the book that you see around generally among people discussing the poem, which is that Satan is the hero of this poem, or even a tragic hero. And I can see why people think this, and I don't think it's a stupid thing to think, or even particularly unreasonable. I can definitely understand how you come to this conclusion for various reasons that I will perhaps get into. But I would say my main issue with this is not that it's wrong necessarily, but that it misses, it's incomplete, I believe, and that it misses some of the most interesting aspects of the poem, which I believe is the parallel between Satan and Adam. And sort of going along with this reading is the idea that Satan is sympathetic in the story, and that Milton controversially is sympathetic to Satan in some sort of blasphemous manner, and that I just think is not the case. Now, to start, I would like to present a thought experiment, which is not the entirety of my argument, but I just think it might be an interesting thing to think about. So don't, come at me saying this is a stupid argument, because I think it is if it was taken in isolation. Let's imagine you are going up to a person with no knowledge of this book. If you were to go up to someone with no knowledge of this book and say to them, "Hi, there is a book in which one of the characters is literally Satan himself. With only this information, can you tell me which character's ideas the author sympathizes with?" And they would probably say, I don't know, probably anyone else in the book. If you have put Satan into your book and are making him say things, chances are you don't agree with what those things are. It's like a very obvious sort of straw man idea of when you make Satan say something, you probably don't think it's the right thing. I don't think that's necessarily what Milton is doing in sort of a straw man sense, but you can just sort of think about it in that sense and go, okay, well, yeah, why would he make Satan say the things he agrees with? That seems a little bit fishy. Like I said, that's not the entirety of my argument. The entirety of my argument begins now. So my main issue with Satan being the hero of Paradise Lost is that it basically ignores the actual hero of Paradise Lost, which is Adam. And some of the confusion may come from the fact that the story begins by focusing on Satan. And we're introduced to Satan first, and Adam shows up a little bit later. And a lot of people, if they study this book in school or like high school or in a sort of early English course in college, will probably read an excerpt. And probably the most excerpted portion is Satan in hell having a sort of council with all the demons and deciding what they're going to do. And then he says, I'd rather rule in hell than serve in heaven, etc., etc. And if that's all you know about the poem, then of course you're going to think Satan's the main guy, because he's basically the only guy you know about. So, yeah, fair enough. This is why I think that's an incomplete reading, because people are literally reading an incomplete portion, or are not reading the book completely. But this isn't always the case. Now, sort of related to this, we have this idea that Satan is a tragic hero. This doesn't make any sense to me at all, because if someone's a tragic hero, they will lose at the end, right? They will lose something important to them, and usually they die to go along with it. Satan does lose something, But he loses it right at the start. And at the end of the story, Satan wins, right? Satan becomes the ruler of earth. And obviously we know, it's told to us by the Archangel Michael, or it's told to Adam, and we overhear it, I suppose, that Jesus is going to come again and, kick him and kick his butt and send him away and make heaven on earth and all this stuff. However, at the sort of chronological ending of the story, Satan has won. Demons rule earth, right? Up until this moment in time, up until the second coming of Christ, Satan and his demons are the rulers of earth. That's just how it is. Adam has lost. This is why Adam is the tragic hero, not Satan. Adam loses at the end, right? So there we go. That's that. But so why does Satan get all this focus? Like, why do we start by being introduced to Satan prior to Adam? Why do the parts featuring Satan feel so much more interesting to us? And this is part of why people think he's the hero, because the parts about Satan stick in our mind better. They're more active, and they're new and exciting. And the reason they're new and exciting is because the story of Adam and Eve, we know it already. We've heard it 1 billion times. It's in the Bible. It's been retold over and over again. We know what happens. We don't care. Like, even if it were a more significant portion of the poem by line count, which I don't know whether that's the case or not. It might be, it might not be. Even if that were so, the portions about Satan would seem more significant to us because they're new, right? The parts from the Bible are original, traditional stories. Everything that happens with Satan is John Milton's invention. All the specifics, at least. The specifics of the war, God sending down lightning and opening a pit and throwing them into hell, Satan traveling to the gates and going into chaos and flying through the abyss of chaos and disguising himself as an angel. All of this stuff is Milton's invention, right? And it's new to us. That's why it's so fascinating. But the purpose of all this stuff about Satan, the purpose of Satan's story in Paradise Lost, if we're looking at it in the greater context of the poem, is to act as a parallel to Adam's story. The Paradise Lost, the phrase Paradise Lost, has a dual meaning, because the paradise that Satan lost is literally, he gets kicked out of heaven, right? He loses his place in heaven. He had this great place to be. It's awesome. He's right next to God. Everybody's happy, and he loses it because he's a jerk. Adam has this paradise that God has created for him. Everything's great. He's hanging out with Eve. It's all fine, and he loses it because of his tragic flaw, which we'll get into later, perhaps. So, and the parallel goes deeper than this, right? Because if we look at the story of Satan more closely, what is the reason Satan gets kicked out of heaven? It's not that he starts a war, which he does. It's the grounds, the foundation of this war, which is that Satan wants to overthrow God. He wants to become the ruler of heaven. He pretends to godhood, right? This is his sin. This is, in fact, original sin, not the original human sin, but this is the birth of sin, which is made clear because when he conceives of this idea for the first time, a person or a being, a creature named Sin is literally comes out of his brain and becomes manifest, right? He has a daughter named Sin who is born in the moment he conceives of trying to overthrow God. So this is the original sin of the universe, not of humanity. Because of this attempt to ascend to godhood and to overthrow God's station, he is kicked out of paradise and sent to hell. Now, when he gets to hell, after he's wallowed around a bit and everyone's a little bit miserable, what's the first thing that him and his demons do? They mine the earth and create a temple for their council and a throne for Satan to sit upon. And this is also a parallel, because what are humans going to do when they're cast out of paradise is they're going to create buildings and create kings and make all this crazy stuff that God doesn't want to exist. So if we look at this, that's Satan's side. Now we look at Adam's side, and we look at the parallels here. And we're doing this a little bit backwards, obviously, because Adam and Eve come first. I mean, in terms of the story exists first, and then Milton creates this parallel. But anyway, we look at the story of Adam and Eve. Similar to sin's birth from Satan's head, Eve, who does the original sin, is created out of Adam's rib. And what is Eve's original sin? What does she do? I mean, what is the basis? What is her temptation? It's not that she eats an apple that God told her not to eat, right? That's the action. But the foundation, the grounds for this action, is that she wants to be like God. She wants to ascend above her station. She wants to usurp God's station in the universe. And we know this because of the way she is convinced to eat the apple. And what happens is that Satan is disguised as a serpent, and he says, hey, look at me. I'm a stupid little serpent. I was a little beast, walking around the ground. Weirdly enough, serpents, this is a complete tangent, but, what is the serpent to begin with? Because its punishment for doing all this is the serpent is made to slither along on the ground. So you have to imagine that this serpent that Satan was disguised as had arms and legs. Or he floated in the air. Can't decide which. Anyway, Satan disguised as the serpent says to Eve, hey, I was just a stupid guy. I was a beast. Then I ate this fruit, and now I am capable of human speech, and I'm capable of reason, and that's pretty awesome. I have ascended a level. I was a beast. I ate the fruit. Now I am human. Logically, since you are a human, if you eat the fruit, you get to ascend another level and will become the equivalent to angels at the very least, and maybe even God if you try hard enough. And this is what convinces Eve, this is what convinces Eve to eat the apple. It's the same foundation, right? This parallel is at the core of the work. And this is why to focus on Satan exclusively is to miss a key portion of it. Now, Satan wins in the end. And Satan gets to give all these great speeches that are very cool and fun to read and interesting. So the question is Milton secretly or not secretly, intentionally or unintentionally, is he sympathetic to Satan? Is he presenting Satan as a sympathetic character? And there are a few facets to this. So if we mean in the sense of, are we supposed to agree with Satan and think he's cool? I would argue, no. He's a bad guy. He is Satan. That's not good, okay? Maybe later, if you're looking at it from an atheistic perspective, you could say, oh, well, God is this stupid thing, blah, blah, blah. Whatever. I don't think this work is atheistic in any sense. This book, while it's somewhat heretical in the details, is pretty orthodox in terms of the way it presents the world, presents original sin, presents Jesus's role coming later, the second coming. All this is perfectly makes sense within Christian theology on a sort of basic level. Why is Satan sympathetic? Because we have been corrupted by him, because he is the prototype for humanity because of our original sin. And that's not good, but it is true in the context of this poem, right? And sort of allegorically within the this reading of the poem. So Satan is sympathetic because we have followed his path. He committed an original sin. He got cast out of paradise. He got angry. He mined up the earth, created buildings, created thrones, created a monarchy, blah, blah, blah. Well, what did we do? What's the basis of humanity? What is our, origin story? Well, we tried to become God. We committed a sin. We got kicked out of paradise. Then we built all this crappy stuff, tried to live in however way we thought was good or cool or whatever we had to. We built buildings, we created monarchies, we created tyrannies, and in this story, all the demons with Satan, at the end, Satan goes back and says, "Hey guys, Earth is our domain now. God's given up on it. It's ours. Woohoo!" And so all the demons come up and become gods, become idols among humanity, become all these sort of polytheistic pagan idols that people worship, like Baal and all this sort of stuff. So that's actually I actually like that detail in the story. I think that's kind of neat. But this is the reason why Satan is sympathetic. Not in a good way, but in a sort of twisted way, where we see ourselves in him because he represents our inherent nature as fallen beings. Not our inherent nature as cool people and tragic heroes and blah, blah, blah. He's the bad part of ourselves. Humanity has fallen. Humanity is bad. Earth is bad. We messed it up, right? That is the core of the story. And that's not good. And it's made quite clear in Paradise Lost itself that this is the case. I think if you read the work closely with this in mind, I think it's hard to sort of ignore this reading. And I think that is satisfactory in itself. However, this reading is only reinforced by Paradise Regained. And many people ignore Paradise Regained and they think it's not as interesting and blah, blah, blah. And I think part of the reason for this is because of this sort of misunderstanding of Satan as a cool hero guy. Because in Paradise Regained, Satan sucks. Like, Satan is not even interesting. He's just kind of dumb. And the reason he's kind of dumb is because his antagonist, his interlocutor, the person he's attempting to tempt and seduce, is not a naive being living in paradise who doesn't know one thing from another. It's literally Jesus himself, the Son of God, who was basically created, manifested by God within the story of Paradise Lost, to be his son. Why? I don't know, just because, that God did it for reasons. But in Paradise Lost, God says to Jesus, or says to his son, who's technically not Jesus yet at this point because he hasn't been born on earth, but whatever, he's the Son of God in heaven, and he says, "Dang it, I know that Satan is going to seduce Adam and Eve, and he's going to make them commit original sin, and paradise is going to be lost, and humanity is going to suffer, and it's going to be pretty bad, and that kind of sucks. If only there were someone who could sacrifice themselves to redeem humanity in the end." And the Son of God says, "I'll do it. I mean, why not? What else am I going to do, And God says, "Great, that's why you're my son. Great work." And so Paradise Regained is that story. It's the Son of God appearing on earth as Jesus Christ, as an attempt, or in his sort of fate, to redeem humanity, and Satan in the wilderness attempts to tempt him. I need to stop saying that. And Satan tries to tempt him by saying, "I can make you rule of the world. I could give you a bunch of sweet treats. I could do all this stuff. You could be the best." And Jesus is just like, I don't care about any of that stuff. Like, I'm literally the Son of God. Why would I want any of this stupid stuff? I know that ruling the world is dumb because you've been doing it for thousands of years, and didn't really do you any good, did it? And so Paradise Regained is kind of interesting in this way because Satan is so extremely, not quite inarticulate, somewhat incomprehensible because he can't win, like he's not very convincing, and powerless, like completely powerless, and it makes him look stupid. And this is intentional. And this, I think, in some sense, we can read it as a sort of final addendum or an epilogue to Paradise Lost. And actually a somewhat unnecessary one in a certain sense, because we're told by the Archangel Michael at the end of Paradise Lost, he says to Adam, hey, like, I know this sucks right now. You got kicked out of paradise and you think everything's kind of bad. You want to kill yourself. And that's understandable. Like, this kind of sucks. But I'm going to show you what's going to happen in the future. He shows him Cain and Abel and all this terrible stuff that's going to happen. And Adam's like, oh, man. But then he says, don't worry too much because Christ is going to come. He's going to redeem everything. Then he's going to be killed for your sins. And then he's going to come again later. There's going to be this big rapture sort of a moment, and all the bad people and the demons are getting left on earth, and humans are going to ascend to heaven, and it's going to be awesome. And Adam's like, well, if that's the case, then I guess this doesn't seem so bad. So that's already there in Paradise Lost. Paradise Regained is sort of a extra nudge at everyone saying, guys, just so you know, like, that was bad what happened in the first one. Like, Satan won, and I don't think that was good. And people have argued that this is sort of a cop-out, or that Milton was sort of swayed by his critics and was like, I need to save face by writing Paradise Regained. I don't really see that argument. I don't think that holds much water. Maybe there is evidence that supports that I don't know about. I'd be interested maybe to learn about that. I wouldn't think, knowing what we know about John Milton, that he would be swayed in this way to do something like that. Like, he seems much more, have much more artistic integrity and sort of self-confidence and authority of his voice to want to appease people in that way. And that's why I wouldn't really agree with that reading. So this is sort of my argument regarding Satan not being the hero, not even an anti-hero, not a tragic hero of Paradise Lost, instead operating as an important, not even foil, but a parallel to Adam, who is the true tragic hero of the story. And in a certain way, in a certain interesting way, which I'm not really going to get into because it's beyond the scope of this, Adam is brought down by love, right? He simply... because Adam didn't have to follow Eve. He didn't have to eat the apple along with her. He chose to do that, knowing it was bad, knowing Eve had screwed up. He just loved her so much he wanted to do that, which is kind of interesting. You know, we're brought down by love in the end. That's a weird detail of the story that could lead to whole other different readings that, like I said, are beyond the scope of this. Now, I thought it would be interesting at the end here to present a few, I guess, parallels to this parallel, a few famous novels that sort of follow this structure more or less. This idea of there's a principal character, and then there's this other character who parallels their story in an interesting way, but isn't the primary focus. And it's interesting to see the different levels of emphasis that can be presented in this, or different level emphases that can be present in this kind of work. Because in Paradise Lost, you could argue that it's not quite 50-50, but Satan is certainly like very important and prominent, maybe equally as or close to as prominent as Adam in the story, even if I think in the overall story, Adam is the most important. And this emphasis can be different. If we look at Frankenstein, or the modern Prometheus, which I actually covered in a video on this channel several years ago and talked a lot about this particular facet. In that story, we have Victor Frankenstein, who is clearly the primary antagonist and hero of the story. And then we have the character in the Frame story, Robert Walton, who is trying to go to the North Pole, be the first person to go to the North Pole. And both of these are kind of Promethean characters, and their fatal flaw is in both cases that they sort of ignore their family, ignore their humanity, ignore their social existence to follow their sort of scientific passion to do this thing that goes against human nature. Robert Walton is willing to abandon his sister to get on the ship and try to get to the North Pole, where arguably nobody should really go. Like, logically, like, why the heck would you want to go there? It's really cold and kind of not near anything you'd want to be at. Be near, I don't know, whatever. And then in the sense of Victor Frankenstein, he hides himself away in this lab and creates this creature, which is an abomination. He similarly abandons his family, abandons his friends, if he has any, I don't really remember. Abandons everybody, loses his humanity completely, and after creating the creature, is a complete outcast because he's haunted by this creature, and obviously he tries to get married and the creature interferes and all this sort of stuff. And this story of Victor Frankenstein is then he tells his story to Robert Walton and convinces him, like, oh man, maybe I shouldn't go to the North Pole and like go totally crazy in pursuit of my passion. So that's an interesting story that follows a similar structure. Another one is actually Moby Dick, and I wrote about this on my website somewhat recently. In that story, we initially are following Ishmael for a lot of the story. He's the main narrator, and then Ahab shows up, and Ahab is this sort of bigger than life character in a similar way, and his story sort of takes over takes over the novel. But when you look at it, there's a somewhat similar drive between the two of them. They're both turning away from the world. Ishmael in a sort of dejected despair, right? At the beginning of the novel, he's like basically suicidal, and then he chooses to go to sea to get over it. Ahab turning away from the world, his wife and his kid, in this pursuit, this fury toward the natural world, or Moby Dick, or whatever you want Moby Dick to represent in this case. And so they're both performing this similar action in completely different ways and with very different philosophies and different ways of approaching, different temperaments. So that's kind of an interesting parallel here, and we can see that this structure is very effective in fiction. Like, all three of these stories, I would say, are sort of masterworks of literature and are all reinforced by the fact that this primary character has this ancillary or secondary character that puts everything into focus by showing us the same sort of struggle from a different perspective, or dealt with in a different way. And that is what I think is so exciting and thrilling about Paradise Lost, and what makes it such a sort of a vital piece of literature, why it sticks with us, why we're talking about it 500 years in the future. Because it's not as simple as just being a retelling of Adam and Eve. It adds this new element. It adds this parallel of Satan. It adds this this new facet to what Adam and Eve tell us about human nature. Not just that we have sinned, but the specific way in which we have sinned. The basis not only for our exile from paradise, but for all the things we've done since then. Our nature as fallen beings from this Christian perspective of the world. So this has been Balkwell. I continue to be Balkwell, but this has been and is currently Balkwell. And there you go. This is why I don't think Satan is the hero of Paradise Lost. Thank you very much for watching. Goodbye.